So Dawn Manske, thank you for participating in the first episode of Sticky Stories.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Welcome. Welcome. So we met during the Catapult competition, sponsored by the St. Louis Business Journal and MasterCard.
Yes.
I was blown away by your story and what you're doing. So why don't you share with our audience what Made for Freedom is about?
Made for Freedom is a for-profit social enterprise. And what we do is we partner with centers around the world that are providing dignified employment for survivors of sex trafficking and marginalized people coming out of marginalized situations. So we offer apparel, we offer jewelry, we offer bags, accessories. I would call it a lifestyle brand. Our products are made by women rescued from sex trafficking and marginalized situations. There are certain key components that we know make women vulnerable to exploitation. And we look for those key components and centers that are working with women from extreme poverty, women that are in areas of devaluation of the girl child, women that are in minority situations where it's hard for them to even be recognized as a citizen of their country. Those things put women in vulnerable situations, making them vulnerable to exploitation. Or women that have been rescued from brothels, or women that have been rescued from red light districts. Providing a job means that they are able to sustain themselves and not be vulnerable again.
So when you say social enterprise, what does that mean?
A social enterprise can actually be a for-profit or a non-profit. There are both.
Okay.
And it basically, the easiest way to explain it is a business type structure that's using commerce to help people. And there are a lot of companies now that are coming along and saying, no, wait, this is a powerful tool using commerce, and this is an important thing to do to make the world a better place.
Right.
And coming together and bringing them together and saying, this actually works. This is a valid business model that we need to be practicing.
Let's talk about your story of why you started Made for Freedom and how you kind of came upon that.
Learning about sex trafficking, I desperately wanted to do something. And I had seen face to face how it plays out in China. I lived in China for 10 years and I knew kids that had been trafficked. And learning more a few years later about the breadth of this atrocity and how extreme it is, seeing a video of an undercover video of a girl that looks like she's 7 in Cambodia being brought in to be sold for sex. That broke my heart. That changed the way I saw life. And I thought, okay, what can I do? I remembered going to India and walking through the streets of Sonagachi and thinking, there are 11,000 women being prostituted out here. I can't fathom that. And I ended up in Judges 7. And it's the story of Gideon, and God says, I want you to fight this entire nation. And he had 36,000 men. And God said, no, that's too many men. So send all these guys home. And so Gideon was like, okay. And he sent them home. And then another time God said, you still have too many men. Send these guys home. And he did. And he ended up with 300 men to fight an entire nation. And experts would say it takes $1 million to start a fashion company that's going to make a difference in the world and get into the market. An expert would say you need 36,000 men to fight an entire nation, not 300. And at that moment, I knew God was going to do something really incredible with something much smaller than $1 million. And it wasn't going to be because of me. If I had $1 million, people would say, well, of course she was successful. She had $1 million.
Right.
But if Made for Freedom is successful, it's not going to be because of my business acumen or my experience. It's going to be because God did something amazing through someone who didn't have the education or the experience or $1 million.
The story you told at the Catapult competition.
Kundula.
Kundula. Tell us that story because it's quite powerful, and then how centers are providing opportunities, and then
Okay.
kind of how that whole situation works.
So the red light district that I was talking about, Sonagachi, is 11,000 women, huge red light district. And one of the centers that we partner with is actually on the edge of that red light district. So one of the stories of a lady that went through that, and she's a perfect example of this, coming out of a difficult situation and being sold to a brothel. She was about 13 years old when her family could not afford to keep her and was looking for a way out. So they gave her in marriage to an older man in the community. Not necessarily because she was ready for marriage, but because they were extremely poor and were not able to afford all of their children, and that was a good option. So this gentleman, this man, took her into his house, but basically treated her like a servant, treated her like a slave, as did his mother. So she came into this house and was really just treated as a servant. And one day, a group of guys came and talked to the mother-in-law, and I have no idea what the conversation was, but what resulted from that conversation was the guys paid the mother-in-law. And while Kundula was out in the field one day, they basically came and they said, "We paid for you, you're ours right now." And they gang raped her. And so this gang of guys gang raped her with the permission and payment to the mother-in-law that they had given. And she was mortified. She was ashamed. She was scared. She didn't go back to her home because she didn't want her husband to know what had happened. She didn't want to go to her family because she was embarrassed. I mean, in this culture, she was wrong, even though she had nothing to do with it.
Right.
So she ended up going to visit her uncle, or stay with her uncle, and her uncle took care of her for a while and then convinced her that it would be better for her and her family if she started a new life. And he helped her. He said he would help her start a new life. And what he did was he took her to Kolkata, the capital, and he sold her to a brothel in Sonagachi. So she lived the next several years as a sex slave under the ownership, under the rule of a brothel owner. And at a certain point, she heard about a center that was being built just outside of this red light district. And she learned that she could get training, and that she learned that she could get a job. And she started going, and she received counseling, and she received education, and she received training so that she could sew. And eventually she got a job with this center. And this center is where we get travel bags and makeup bags and t-shirts and just some amazing stuff. So she worked there for years. She learned the whole process. She developed management skills. She developed leadership skills. And at a certain, and she stayed living in the red light district, because when she went back to stay in her little apartment, she was able to talk to the women in the community around her that were still selling themselves and say, you know what, you're worth more. There's more to life than
That's
this.
awesome.
You are worth more than this. You have dignity. You should be respected because of who you are, not because of what people will pay for you. So after after several years, the people, her father, I guess, passed away. And somehow she ended up with ownership of this land where she came from her village. She went back to that land and she claimed it, and she has built a mill, and she is now employing survivors of sex trafficking to make fabric that can be used with the center she was working with, but also other organizations. So she's not only come through this, but she's helping other women understand their value and providing jobs for them.
Let's talk a little bit, because I don't think people understand how prevalent the human trafficking is, not only across the world, but in the United States, and in particular, our own city of St. Louis, Missouri.
It is the fastest growing illegal industry in the world. But if you think about those components, it's the same. You've got good transportation. We have multiple interstates coming through St. Louis. You've got a city that's centrally located. So that makes us a very good destination. It makes us a very prime destination and situation for trafficking. Any city with multiple interstates coming through is good, but because we're centrally located, that adds to that. So St. Louis is in the top 20 of trafficking hubs in the United States. No one knows exactly what that number is. Some would say we're number 13, but it doesn't matter. Right. If it's happening, it needs to stop. Wherever it's happening, we need to do something to fight against it, to prevent it.
So Dawn, thank you so much for being part of this, the first episode of Sticky Stories. How about telling the audience how to get in contact with you online?
Okay. You can find us at madeforfreedom.com and look around at all of our products, but you can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, and Polyvore.
Thank you, Dawn. And thank you for sticking with us. If you have a sticky story, please complete the form on the webpage, and we'll get back with you as soon as possible.